which according to some archaeologists, this was a kind of paradisos, which is practically a Bhagastana, a place of gods, which means practically a park where only the king was allowed to hunt animals. We think that this identification of this place just before the rock reliefs is correct, because in the rock reliefs themselves, hunting is a very important element, actually, repeated more times. Next slide, please. I would like to show you how the main grotto, we have two grottos in Taq-i Bustan and an external rock relief. The main grotto, the bigger grottos, is actually where I'm going to focus my presentation today. And this photo, which I took in 2006, show you that it was actually possible until a few years ago to access and enter into the cave, into the grotto, and actually see every small detail. In the next slide, please, I can show you how it's nowadays the monument. You see the new authorities of Taq-i Bustan decided to isolate the two grottos and the external rock relief that you see here on the right from the public, just by excavating a canal in front of the monument itself. And according to the authorities, this was actually the aspect, the original aspect of Taq-i Bustan until approximately the Safavid Qajar period. And they decided to reshape the place like in ancient times. Unfortunately, they decided to do this without any archaeological excavation, which could have been a very good occasion. So next slide, please. You can see that now practically for visitors, for tourists, it's impossible to access the smaller grotto and the bigger one, which is good for the preservation of monuments, but it makes it very difficult to see every small detail, because what we have in Taq-i Bustan, and we have only here, it's the decoration on the garments, which are a very interesting connection of this specific pre-Islamic monument with the Silk Road, because we are talking mainly about textile design here. Next slide, please. Just to complete the panoramic view about the reshaping of Taq-i Bustan, this is very curious. The authorities decided to enlarge the pond, which was always there. And this was very appreciated by young Iranian couples, young lovers can have some nice time here on special boats, just prepared opposite of the rock reliefs. This is something very curious for me. I would have preferred a smaller pond and leave Iranian lovers to go, for example, in parks and other places, not just in Taq-i Bustan, you know. And this is the situation of this very interesting monument right now. Next slide, please. So this is how Taq-i Bustan is going to appear to you if you are going to visit this monument. And just in front of the larger cave, the bigger cave, you have this view. You see that it's impossible to see what you have on the two lateral panels. You just see what you have in front of you inside the grotto or outside as well. But if you wanted to see what is on the two sides, well, you have to enter, or you have to see my presentation, for example, because you don't have many other options. You see that the monument, even from an architectonic point of view, it's something completely different than other Sasanian rock reliefs. It's a kind of cube with this crenellation on the top. And then you have the arch. The name Taq-i, the arch of the garden, takes the name from this shape. Now, there are some external decorations like the two angels, which are beside this, in the upper part of the arch, you can see a crescent, a moon with some ribbons, and other ribbons are attached to the, for example, the ring that both angels are offering in the direction of this ribbon crescent, and other ribbons are at the end of the arch. And these are all typical, not only Sasanian, but even you have in Parthian art, you have in Kushan art, you have in Sogdian paintings everywhere. Anyway, we are not going to talk about the origin of these details. I'm going to show you why, in the beginning of this presentation, I said that Taq-i Bustan is a very controversial and a very problematic monument. Now, next slide, please. This is a sketch prepared by a Japanese team that was at work in Taq-i Bustan between the 60s and the 70s of the last century. And in 1984, these Japanese scholars were able to produce a very important 4 volumes study on Taq-i Bustan. They did very interesting studies, but no archaeological excavation there. So this is what you have practically when you are in front of a monument. You have this shape from an architectonic point of view, crenellation above, arch with something inside. Actually, if you don't go inside, exactly like in this schematic reproduction, you have no idea about the 2 panels that you have on the 2 sides. Just a small note about the name of a site, which is Taq-i Bustan, the arch of a garden. Usually, this is the official name of a site. But according to local legends, according to some written sources, which are all dated to the Islamic period, sometimes this site is called Taq-i Bastam, or this Bastam is sometimes called Vishtam, Bestan, other variations, because, you know, Kermanshah is a place where not only Persian language is spoken. We have Kurds, we have Armenians, we have Arabs. We have some traces of this name in Greek sources. We have, of course, Azeri, which is a Turkish language, etc. And this is very interesting because we should wonder who was this Bastam. If this Taq-i Bustan is sometimes called the Arch of Bastam, who is this Bastam? Well, actually, in one text from the Islamic period, which is dated to the 12th century, we have some explanation. The anonymous author is telling us this Bastam was the uncle of Khosrow II. Khosrow Parvez, who probably is the king that you can see in this slide, represented in the upper part, in the middle, between Anahita on the left and Ahura Mazda on the right. Of course, these identifications are just possible because of iconographical comparisons, because of this Islamic text called Mujmal al-Tawarikh, which is telling us that the monument was actually started by Bastam, this uncle of Khosrow II, a historical character, a historical person who had some problems with Khosrow II, and in the end, he rebelled openly against Khosrow, and Khosrow was able to defeat him and kill him. So if you look at Taq-i Bustan just from this position, ideally reproduced in this sketch that you have in this slide, you see in the upper part Khosrow with two Mazdean deities, and in the lower part, possibly Khosrow repeated as a victorious warrior, the one who probably defeated Bustan. So you have to keep in mind these texts, sometimes very specific, like in the case of Mujmal al-Tawarikh, sometimes more vague, but not less important in any case. Unfortunately, we don't have very specific information, and we don't have right in this cave, in the bigger one, Middle Persian inscriptions that could be considered contemporary to the production, to the sculptures themselves. Next slide, please. Now, the shape from an architectonic point of view of Taq-i Bustan, it's not that isolated as we could think. We have actually this silver gilt dish, which was unfortunately not excavated. You know, in Sasanian art, we have very few metal work that we could consider, how to say, the accomplishment of archaeological investigations. Actually, they are only 6. So wherever you go around the world, in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, or you go in America, there are many museums with huge collections of so-called Sasanian metalwork. We have to be very careful because few of them have been excavated during controlled excavations. This one was not excavated, and then we cannot be absolutely sure that this is not early Islamic or proto-Islamic object. We don't know exactly, but we have some suspects. Anyway, the shape of this building where the Sasanian or the Persian king is represented with this sword, it's very similar to Taq-i Bustan. Don't look at the birds on the two sides, look at the crescent on the top and the crenellation. So if we look in Sasanian art or in early Islamic artistic production, we have some similar constructions here and there. Next slide, please. I call your attention on this monument, which is not very far from Taq-i Bustan. Actually, it's exactly the same monument, but unfortunately, very little decorations survived. We have something in the external part, and then we have this crenellation with this arrow opening. So very little decoration. Actually, inside this huge monument, it's really big. If you look at the woman on the left of this slide, this is a poster from the Mirase Farangi of Kermanshah. You can see that it's really big. Inside, there is like some remains of a podium, of a pedestal, where possibly a statue or something sculptural was originally represented. Of course, during the centuries, it was lost. But because of a similarity with Taq-i Bustan, which is really amazing, we could think that even from a chronological point of view, this monument could be possibly late Sasanian. Next slide, please. Okay, in just beyond the Iranian border in Iraq, in modern Iraq, we have this tower with the inscription of Paikuli. According to the reconstruction by Herzfeld, this is the one I'm showing you in this slide, the monument looked very similar to Taq-i Bustan. We have no opening, however, so it's not exactly the same, but again, just to say that maybe Taq-i Bustan is not that unique as we could imagine. Next slide, please. And here we have something extremely interesting, in my opinion, because we have something which has been chronologically dated to the pre-Islamic period, pre-Sasanian, very late Sasanian, Parthian, sorry, in Iranian Azerbaijan. It's called the Kalei-Zahak, and this is what we have nowadays if you go to visit the monument. In the next slide, please, I can show you a schematic reconstruction, which is actually extremely similar to Taq-i Bustan. Again, we don't have much decorations inside this monument. Actually, we have some traces of paintings. We have some carvings, some geometric decoration. So we don't know exactly the function of this monument, but it was something probably connected from an architectonic point of view, at least with Taq-i Bustan. And if the chronology proposed by German and Iranian scholars is correct, we could say that the Sasanian didn't invent this kind of shape, because already during the Parthian period, we had something like this. Now the question is, did the Parthian invented this, or could we find something even more ancient than the Parthian period? Next slide, please. Yeah, this is very interesting. It's something I found recently in Hatra. So we are here in a Semitic environment. You know, Hatrian was, we know the language, and these people spoke a language similar to Arabic, and they used pretty much artistic language, which we could call Hellenistic, with a lot of Parthian elements. So these people were very open to Greek art, obviously, like everybody else in that period. And they had this attention to everything which was coming from the Iranian world, from especially Parthian art. And also in Hatra, we have this kind of monument, which is probably in this relief I'm showing you in this slide, another architectonic element which is very similar to Taq-i Bustan. And in this case, not only we have the arch, not only we have the crenellation on the top, we have also two winged angels, which we could call winged victories, beside, and one even inside, just above the head of this person who is doing some kind of celebration. You see, with his right hand, he's almost touching an altar. And then we have also a clear solar symbolic representation of the sun on the standard, which is next to this very important person, dressed like a Parthian nobleman. So even in Hatra, which is not Parthian stricto sensu, in any case, there is something. It's something which I would prefer to connect to the geographical setting than to the to Sasanian or Iranian traditions. Now, next slide, please. I would like to call your attention on the Neo-Assyrian capital, Nineveh, where we have some very interesting reliefs, which are now preserved in London, as you know. You will see that during this presentation of mine, I'm going to jump quite often in time and space, especially in time, because in this case, we have to go back in time many centuries before Taq-i Bustan, Kalei-Zahak, and the Hatrian relief I showed you before. And this is because we don't have every passage. We still have many gaps in this kind of association, which I'm trying to show you, because I would like to convince you about my arguments. But I'm forced to jump pretty often, especially in time. So I'm sorry for this kind of methodological problem. I know is not usually allowed, but if you follow my way of thinking, we can probably find some more elements. Next slide, please. I want to show you in detail the specific relief where we have something which possibly could be connected to Taq-i. And what is very interesting is that once more, the general setting is a hunting of the Assyrian king. Next slide, please. I show you the relief itself. Here is not very clear, but next slide, please. I can show you a little bit closer this very curious architectonic element, which is, in my opinion, something very close to Taq-i, not only from an architectonic point of view itself, but even from a cultural point of view, maybe religious. I cannot really decide what is it. But if we check in studies about Assyrian art, I can see that many scholars are pretty embarrassed about the identification of this monument. So imagine the setting, the general scene is a hunting park of the Assyrian king. And on the top of a hill, there is this monument, which is definitely an arch, pretty unusual in Assyrian art. I mean, we have arches, we have gates, but this one, it's a little bit unusual, I would say. It's not isolated. We have other things pretty much like this, but not exactly with all the details recalling to our mind Taq-i. You see, we have a kind of cube. Imagine it in 3 dimensions. We have the cube with this crenellation on the top, and then we have the arch. And in my opinion, here, we cannot see through the arch. You know, some scholars, especially Italian scholars, who studied this relief, I suspect they had in their mind Roman arches, triumphal arch. We have many in Rome, for example, and in other parts of Europe. And this is something different. We cannot really see through the arch here, because in my opinion, this was a cube with the back side closed and decorated. And decorated with what? Well, with a hunting scene. The hunting scene is represented according to Assyrian art. So the king is not hunting on horse, he's hunting on a chariot. And he is going to shoot a leaping lion who's going to attack him. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a better picture, but if you look carefully under the horse, you can see the shape of a lion already dead. And this is something we have in Sasanian art. Very often on Sasanian, in Sarmashad, for example, in another Sasanian rock relief in Fars, we have a king who is killing the lion with a sword, and the lion is already dead under the feet. In Sasanian metalwork, in Sasanian seals, the king is shooting from a horse, the lion, or walking, any animal. Usually it's a lion, a deer, wild boar, and the animal is already dead under the feet of the king, under the horse. And this is something very interesting, because in Sasanian art, the figure of a king is central. The king cannot fail. But this is not something Sasanian, actually. The Sasanians probably knew this formula, which was already used, as you can see, in Neo-Assyrian art. And in my opinion, if we think about this monument that you see in this slide in 3 dimensions, most likely what you see here is what an ideal observer is going to see standing in front of the monument, in front of the pavilion, let's say. 2 more hunting scenes were probably represented on the sides that, of course, we cannot see here because Assyrian art is bidimensional. Anyway, this is what I want to call to your attention. Most likely, Taq-i Bustan is just a monument which continues a tradition which was always there. And most likely, it was rooted in that area that we could call the periphery of Mesopotamia. Nineveh is more Mesopotamian, but is not that far from Taq-i Bustan. So maybe in the past, there were many monuments like this, and everybody, every important person was going to use in order to celebrate himself. But the setting, the environment was always something connected with hunting. And if you remember one of the first slides I showed you earlier, there was actually a hunting park, a place only for the king, a very exclusive place, where only the king and his court were allowed to do what? Well, probably to hunt. Next slide, please. I did this comparison between Taq-i Bustan and the relief from Nineveh, which is in the British Museum now, because even though we have 2 monuments which are built in 2 completely different periods, not that far away, but in any case, pretty far away. But in any case, it's the time leap, which is very big. We have a big gap, but still, I think that we cannot ignore these similarities. And if we could find the meaning of Taq-i Bustan as a celebrative monument, a celebrative hunting pavilion, for example, maybe we could help our colleagues, specialists in Mesopotamian studies, to better understand some problematic points of Mesopotamian art, and specifically Neo-Assyrian art. One last thing about the Assyrian monument that you can see in this slide on the right. The hunting scene, the king shooting the lion, it's in the upper part of this, inside the arch. So it's like if we are looking, for example, like in Taq-i Bustan on the left of the screen, in front of a monument, and you have exactly this division on 2 levels, okay? On the upper level, you have something, and on the lower level, you have something else. Maybe in the Assyrian relief, we had something which was painted. We don't know. Anyway, during the centuries, this other part disappeared. Maybe it was never decorated, but it's important to keep in mind this division on 2 levels, because I think that it's exactly what we have in Taq-i Bustan. Next slide, please. And this is why I think that the separation of levels is very important, because not far from Nineveh, still in Iraq, we have this monument. And it's the same monument. On one side, we have something, and on the other side, we have something else. If you look on the left of this slide, we have the division in 2 levels. The lower level, we have something pretty Mesopotamian. On the upper part, again, something very Mesopotamian, but I think we have a very clear parallel with Taq-i Bustan, because also in Taq-i Bustan, in the upper level, as I told you, we have probably Khosrow II Parvez and Anahita and Ahura Mazda. In this Neo-Assyrian rock relief, which possibly the Sasanians saw or knew, we have the king, and then on the left we have Marduk, and on the right we have a goddess, probably the wife of Marduk. In any case, what is important is that we have a god and a goddess. They even have their symbolic animals. They are standing according to a very clear Mesopotamian artistic formula. The deity standing or sitting on his or her symbolic animal. So we can identify them. Look also what they have in hand. Marduk on the left, he's standing on the Mesopotamian dragon called Mukhshushu, and he has a rod and a ring. And these symbols you can see in Sasanian rock reliefs, the very early ones in Fars. So you see that there are many Mesopotamian elements which could tell us something about some problematic points in Sasanian art. And we see them as far as Central Asia during the whole pre-Islamic period and even early Islamic one. Anyway, about this monument, if you look on the other side of this monument, on the right of the slide, you can even see something which is pretty unusual in Assyrian art, which is the frontal representation of three figures. Probably here we have the king and the two other attendants beside him. And it's very interesting to see that the king is not only frontal, but he's even taller. And again, if you remember the slides I showed you before, this is exactly what we have in Taq-i Bustan. And if scholars correctly identified the two figures beside Khosrow II Parvez in Taq-i Bustan, like Ahura Mazda and Anahita, then this is very strange because Khosrow is a little bit taller. Actually, he is standing on a pedestal, which is bigger. It's thicker than the pedestal of Anahita and Ahura Mazda. And this is making him taller. Also because he has a very elaborate crown, but anyway, it could look like something very unrespectful. But I don't think the Sasanians had big troubles in proposing something like that because they had something before them, which is this Mesopotamian relief. It's probably the king with two attendants, but the idea is pretty much the same in my opinion, even though we have this big time gap, which for me is very difficult to fill, but the similarities between Taq-i Bustan and these Assyrian monuments, in my opinion, is too big to be considered just something casual. I think we have here repetition, a tradition respected possibly in a first stage of the construction of Taq-i Bustan by Bustan, and then continued by Khosrow II. I'm talking about the history and reconstruction of Taq-i Bustan, and at the same time, I want to show you some more slides. Next, please. So this is Taq-i Bustan, and this picture is taken just at the entrance. In this case, you can see the lateral panels pretty much, pretty well, okay? Now, if you look carefully, even from a stylistic point of view, you can see that the panel inside on the left and the panel inside of a grotto on the right are in very low relief. You can see that there is a square frame, framing actually the hunting scene. On the left, we have the king hunting wild boars from a boat. On the right, we have the king hunting a deer. It's a deer hunt. And again, we have the frame all around the scene. Now, if you look on the back of the grotto, you can see the frame, square, and then you have the king with a halo, big halo, completely covered with armor, with a long spear, a shield, and he's sitting on his horse. But if you look carefully, you can see that this king on a horse with armor, it's carved more in deep. There is approximately 1 meter distance between the frame and the sculpture. And the sculpture is almost in the round. It's almost detached from the back of the grotto. And the lateral panels are very low reliefs. So this, in my opinion, means that we have also in this case 2 different phases. First, when the cave was carved, the lateral panels were prepared, and later something was added in the back of the grotto. I will show you why I think, and I'm not the only one thinking in these terms. Now, just to conclude about this slide, I think that Markus Mode, a very important German scholar, is right in thinking that the person riding a horse is not a deity, but a king with big halo. And this is because, you see, this figure is under the feet of the upper level, where we have Khosrow II in the center, Anaita on the left, and Ahura Mazda on the right. So it would be very unusual to find a representation of a deity under the feet of somebody else, God or king, whoever. It's not that normal. And by the way, Louis van der Berg, a very important Belgian scholar, already established a kind of rule for Sasanian art where we never observe deities with weapons. And I will show you later in a better image that this knight, this person on the horse, has a long spear, shield, he has a bow case and a quiver for arrows. So he is fully armored. He has a lot of weapons. So it's not that normal to have in late Sasanian art a deity with so many weapons. Next slide, please. I think it's a sketch. And in this sketch, I report all the elements I was discussing with you. There is another interesting element. If you look on the back of a horse, just behind the horse rider, you can see that there is a specific Sasanian symbol, what in Central Asia, in a Turkish environment, or in Kushan art, we could call tamga. It's a round, a circle with stylized ribbons attached. It's practically the ring with ribbons that Ahura Mazda and Anahita are giving to Khosrow on the upper level. And this symbol appears in Sasanian art pretty early, in rock reliefs in Firuzabad, but also in Sasanian coins. It's something that we have very often. So it's probably something connected with a Sasanian royal family. So one more element to say that probably we have here the king as a warrior, as a victorious warrior, and not a deity. Now, in the next slide, I would like to call your attention on another element that Markus Mode, this German scholar, identified in Taq-i Bustan. He said that the chronology of Taq-i Bustan cannot be earlier than the mid-6th century because of the shape of this quiver. It's reproduced in this slide in the upper part in a photo, and in the lower part in a sketch that Mode prepared. And the shape of this quiver is like I think in English is called the sand clock. Okay, the shape is pretty unusual in Western Asia. It's something which was invented in the steppes. It's something coming from Central Asian people, and probably invented or anyway adopted by the Turks and spread everywhere in the Eurasian continent, but not before the mid 6th century. So this is a very good point to propose better chronologies. And then in the next slide, I would like to show you the different phases of construction that Marcus Mode proposed. Practically, Marcus Mode didn't know the Mesopotamian connections, which I'm proposing in this presentation. But he proposed that in the very beginning, when Taq-i Bustan was probably prepared by Bustan, we had inside the grotto, at the low level, not two hunting scenes, but three. And one hunting scene was just on the back of the grotto. And it was framed like the lateral ones. Later, for some reason that we don't know exactly, somebody decided to destroy the panel which was in front of an ideal observer entering the bigger grotto, destroyed it, and that's the reason why, in order to carve a new sculpture, he had to move a little bit back. So that's why we have the frame on the back of the grotto, and then we have to go in deep, like 1 meter, to find the new sculpture. And in my opinion, this is not something which happened because, for example, the king who decided to do Taq-i Bustan changed his mind. No, I think that we are talking about two different personalities. And in my opinion, these personalities were Bastam in a first stage and Khosrow II in a second stage. Why Khosrow destroyed the hunting scene, which was originally, hypothetically, because of course we cannot be 100% sure, why he did this? Well, he decided when he defeated Bastam, his uncle, not to destroy this monument, but to adapt and to reshape in a way, even taking some symbols from the original Bastam period phase. Now, just to conclude the Mode hypothesis, this is very interesting. Without knowing the Mesopotamian connection, Mode proposed that in origin, on the back of the grotto, the triad, the triple hunting representation included the wild boar on the left, the deer on the right, and in the middle, a lion hunt. And this is very interesting for me because in the Neo-Assyrian rock relief, which is now in the British Museum, but originally from Nineveh, we have actually the king hunting the lion. So of course it's impossible to reconstruct that much, but it would be very interesting. It's intriguing me, this possibility that in origin, even in Taq-i Bustan, we had a lion hunt. And then somebody else arrived, Khosrow II, in my opinion, and destroyed exactly the lion hunt. But in Mesopotamia, we have the original, how to say, the original model of this. Of course, it's impossible to prove this idea, but it's something, in my opinion, extremely fascinating. Now, next slide, please. Now, let's concentrate on the wild boar hunting scene on the left inside the cave. Next slide, please. And this is what we have. I guess everybody is familiar with this representation. We have something very interesting here. The king, first of all, does not wear, for the very first time in Sasanian art, a crown. This is very strange. He has a very strange, very simple textile hat, for a very simple reason, in my opinion. Because the crown of Sasanian art is just a symbol. It was impossible for the king to hunt with this uncomfortable crown on his head. So in this panel, the absence of a crown and the use of this soft textile hat is something extremely realistic. Because in my opinion, we don't have official Sasanian art here. And I'm going to explain you why. Another detail in this panel, it's the figure of a king. You see, he is hunting in the marshes and he is standing on a boat and he's repeated twice. In the central part of the panel, he is shooting the wild boars. On the right, he is taking an arrow that his attendant is giving him. And very interesting, he has a halo behind his head. So this difference, I mean, he's wearing the same hat, he's wearing the same garment, same decoration, same weapons, but he has a halo. So some scholars said this is the Fravashi of a king, it's a kind of soul for Zoroastrians, something like that. It's a scene which is involving the afterlife. We don't know exactly. But in my opinion, what is interesting to see here is the repetition. And this is not typical of Sasanian art. It's true that in Sasanian art, we have the king killing an animal, for example, a wild boar, and the wild boar is already dead under his feet. But it's not that normal to have the king repeated several times, like in a modern comic book, if you want, or in Greek paintings, very ancient Greek paintings reproduced sometimes the adventure of a hero in different phases. Or we have in Sogdian art, we have in Gandhara, we have this kind of things in sequence, okay? What is called the narrative art, paratactic representation. But in Sasanian art, I would say that Taq-i Bustan is a unique monument. Next slide, please. We have a close image of decoration on the garment of a king and his necklace. So in the sketch, you can see that the hat is not a crown at all. Even the ribbon behind is a very small one. And then he has this necklace with 3 pendants. This is something we have in Sasanian coins after Khosrow II. And unique again is the decoration of this monster, this composite creature with wings, peacock tail, legs, the pose, and the face of a dog. And this creature has been identified with Simurgh in Persian, Middle Persian Sanmurv, Avestan, Saena, Marega, but I think that here we have some problem because this creature is not Simurgh, Sanmurv. This is a representation of Far, Farre, Khvarra in Middle Persian, Khvarena in Avestan, which means glory, charisma, okay? Something which was necessary to the king to rule, to a god to be a god, to a hero to kill monsters and demons, okay? And we have some traces of this, but my point is that this creature was not invented by the Sasanians and is coming from Eastern Iran, which means Central Asia. And how it arrived in Sasanian Iran, I think it's because of Bastam again. In written sources, for example, in Mujmal al-Tawarikh, it's written that Bastam, when he was in good terms with Khosrow II, his nephew, he was the ruler, the governor of Khorasan, which is Central Asia. And in my opinion, from Central Asia, he took something and he imported in Sasanian Iran. And only later, when Khosrow II quarreled with Bastam and defeated and killed him, he appropriated some elements like this creature and wanted to reproduce on his own garments. And then Bastam For another period, was a governor in the Caucasus, Azerbaijan or Armenia, we don't know exactly. And exactly especially in early Christian Armenian art, we have a representation of this creature, almost contemporary with Taq-i. And this is because, in my opinion, the link of all these monuments is this very interesting personality, Bastam, the governor of Khorasan, the governor of Azerbaijan, who became an enemy, was defeated, but left something in Taq-i. Now, next slide, please. We have some interesting connections between the image of possibly Bastam shooting the wild boar in Taq-i, and on the right of this slide, there is one of the ambassadors in the so-called Hall of the Ambassadors in Afrasiab, which is pre-Islamic Samarkand, approximately mid-7th century, which means practically contemporary, more or less, with Khosrow II. Khosrow II ruled between 590 and 628, so very early 7th century. Anyway, the period is more or less that one. Next slide, please. This is the painting in Taq-i, and this is very interesting. Not only this Iranian ambassador probably from Bactria, from Chaganyan. He has the same hat like in Taq-i, and even the decoration on his garment, I reproduce in a sketch on the right, on the left of this slide, you have the so-called simurg, so-called senmurv in Middle Persian. In the upper part of this slide on the right, I reproduce some Sogdian countermarks on coins, okay, 7th century, and these countermarks not only have the representation of this creature with dog face, paws, a bird or peacock tail and wing, but even an inscription in Sogdian saying Farn. Farn is Fareh in Farsi, and Khwara in Middle Persian. So finally, we have some good connection, text and image. And I would prefer to rely on Sogdians than Sasanians for these associations, because I think that this is something connected with Eastern Iran, with Central Asia. You know, Khorasan means also Central Asia. Not exactly Sogdiana. I prefer probably some part of contemporary Afghanistan, maybe Zabulistan, where the hero, the national hero, Rustam, who was, by the way, an Eastern Iranian hero, lived. And probably in these regions, Eastern Iranians developed this kind of images that in the end arrived in Taq-i. Now, next slide, please. In Sogdian art, we have a very first representation of this creature under the throne of a local deity. You know, in Sogdian paintings, we have very often the god or goddess with his or her symbolic animal. And in this case, we have this deity sitting on a throne, and on one side of a throne, we have this winged dog, which in my opinion is connected again with the Mesopotamia element. You see the horn, a curly horn just behind the ears. And the next slide, please. I think this curly horn, next please, is connected with, next slide, with this creature, yeah, with Mukhshushu from Mesopotamia. You see, just this curly horn. So it's not exactly the same creature, but in Sogdiana, which is in any case in Central Asia, we have already in the 5th century or early 6th century, something which is connected with Mesopotamia. We have to keep in mind that the Mesopotamian connection is very important in the whole Iranian ecumene, not only in Persia, but in Central Asia as well. This is because probably of the Achaemenid Empire. Anyway, this is a little bit complicated. We can discuss in another moment. Now, I would like to focus on Taq-i Bustan. Next slide, please. Now, the seal that we have here on the left of this slide, it's in the British Museum, and it's the only Sasanian, late Sasanian seal, where possibly we have a representation of this creature, which I don't identify as a Senmurv or Simurg. I prefer to call pseudo Senmurv, pseudo Simurg. And it's the only seal, possibly Sasanian, with this Middle Persian inscription. But unfortunately, the inscription is not telling us what is represented. But still, it's something very interesting. And I think that this creature is the one we have on the Sogdian counter marks, which I reproduce in a sketch here in the upper part of the slide. Now, according to my colleague Simone Cristoforetti, there are some Islamic texts by Masudi and Biruni telling us something about this kind of creature. In fact, Cristoforetti liked the idea that what Masudi is calling Khorasan Khora, which means the glory of Khorasan, which was translated by Herzfeld like in Latin with this expression, Gloria Orientis. So the Eastern glory, something which is coming, from East. And these two Muslim authors preserved some kind of memories that this creature described by Biruni as flying foxes. So the description is matching pretty well. Our pseudo-Simurg is exactly this one. And there is a connection with Khorasan again. And it's not by chance, in my opinion, that Bustan was governor of Khorasan when he was in good terms with the Sasanians. Now, next slide, please. And this creature, very interesting, was adopted in very late Sasanian Persian art, very late Sasanian Iran, and then it was adopted in Umayyad Iran. It became very much appreciated by the Umayyads. It's even on coins, but it's not Sasanian. It's something which is coming from East Iran. And later, it became very popular in Byzantine art in the Caucasus. Even in Italy, we have quite often in textiles, especially. We have even in barbaric Europe. And we have some troubles in identifying exactly what the Christians wanted to represent with this creature. But I think that studying its origin, not in Sasanian Persia, but in Central Asia, and slowly finding every passage, we could probably in the next future give all the answers. Now, next slide, please. Now, I would like to conclude with some observations on the next slide, on the next panel, which is the one about the deer hunt. Yes, this one. So again, also this panel, it's very non-Sasanian in spirit, I would say. Once more, we have the king represented bigger than his attendants, and he is represented 3 times on 3 levels. He is represented above, waiting for the hunt, listening to music and singers. In the middle, he is hunting these animals. And in the lower part, it's very enigmatic. We don't know exactly what he's doing. I have called it pietas of a hunter, the piety of this hunter, probably Bustan, who is not killing the animal. Maybe in the next slide, I can show you better. You see, the hunter is holding probably the quiver in his right hand, and he has his bow positioned on his chest. So he's not going to kill the animal. The animal is probably a female deer with some ribbons, you see, floating in the air. And there are two attendants on the left of this slide who are opening the enclosure, the park, the hunting park of a king, which is a net. If you look on the right, you can see that there is a kind of lattice pattern. So these people are lifting apart and allowing this animal to pass through without any trouble. And there are some attendants of the king on the right who are actually embellishing this animal. The next slide, please. You see, there is somebody who is transporting something on his back. And there are some other attendants who are probably attaching these ribbons to the neck of a deer. So they have to render it recognizable by the king, who's not going to kill her even by chance. And just to conclude, I would like to show you in the next slide why I'm saying that this probably, I mean, Taq-i Bustan, it's more connected to Central Asia than Persian art, than official Sasanian art. We have to go back once more to Afrasiab, which is pre-Islamic Samarkand. And in the reconstructions of these paintings, you see the whole of ambassadors here. We have not only Sogdians, you know, Samarkand was the capital of Sogdiana, according to Chinese sources. And we have here many foreigners. We have a Chinese with this hat presenting probably silk. We have Turks with long hair playing music, introducing embassies, a little bit like we have in Persepolis. And there is somebody kneeling. And this way of kneeling is very similar to the attendant of the king in Taq-i Bustan, who's kneeling in order to better attach this ribbon to the neck of a deer. But what is very interesting is, in more general terms, is that exactly like in Sogdian art, which is a kind of narrative art, in Taq-i Bustan, in the two hunting panels, we have again something narrative, even different moments of the actions of a king who is hunting these animals, and how he is hunting these animals, not like a Sasanian king, not wearing this uncomfortable crown, which is just symbolic in official Sasanian art, of course. He's not fail in his shooting the wild boar or deer, which are not represented already killed behind the horse or below, I mean, the hooves of a horse. We have something different, more narrative than self-celebrative, all focusing on the figure of a king like in official Sasanian art. And I think that this is because Bustan, the Bustan of the name of a monument, Taq-i Bustan, very similar, was originally the governor of Khorasan. And just to conclude, the next slide, please. I would like to show you the decoration on the garment of the king represented as a warrior. We have again this creature with the face of a dog, the pose, wings, and peacock tail. But this stage of Taq-i Bustan is already the one pertaining Khosrow II. So we have to imagine, if my reconstruction of a history of this monument is not too fantastic, it's not science fiction, but going to convince you, we have a first stage started by Bustan, the uncle of Khosrow II, who, according to the Mujmal al-Tawarikh, was given Taq-i Bustan as a gift and imported from Central Asia, from where he had been governor for some time in Khorasan, Eastern Iran, Central Asia, whatever, he imported this decoration, which is the famous Khorasan Khora of Masudi that Biruni identified with a flying fox. You know, flying fox, flying dog, more or less, we could say that we are in the right direction. So in the second stage, which is this one, in the back of a grotto, where probably Khosrow destroyed the pre-existing panel, and he penetrated approximately 1 meter in deep into the rest of the grotto, he reshaped the monument. And what he did, this is very interesting, he appropriated a symbol, this kind of composite creature with a dog face, wings, peacock tail, that is glory, not Simurg. It's a Fareh. It's a Fareh of the East, of the Orient. And he reproduced on his garment, in my opinion, with a very clear proclamatory attitude. He said, now it's me, the one with glory, okay? It's not anymore Yama, Apamnapat, or Mithra. It's me, Khosrow, the glorious, the victorious king, the one who is dominating trade with China and, of course, the Silk Road, the one who didn't like the Sogdians and the Turks to enter in his kingdom. You know that during the time of Khosrow I and II, the Silk Road, of course, was passing through Persia, but these kings were very jealous of their power and didn't like very much the Sogdians, the Turks, and the Byzantines to have direct connections. So I think I have concluded my presentation. I have actually other slides, but I'm afraid that we have already reached the hour. And this is mostly what I wanted to focus on, which is the textiles, the decorations we have on the garment of a king in Taq-i Bustan. And hopefully I have convinced some in the audience about my ideas, which I hope are not too fantastic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Compareti. It was really interesting, and it was such a pleasure to hear your thoughts and interests. So if anyone from the audience has any questions, please join us. Hello to everybody.
Hello.
Hey, Matteo, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk, as always. My question is just about the quiver that you mentioned on Khosrow I figure. You mentioned something that it was not accustomed before Khosrow II, and it has some Central Asian root. I do agree that it has obviously the Central Asian root, as you may know. It has been portrayed on the Kushan coins from Heraius, and then Indo-Scythian and Indo-Parthian. But there is a huge gap between the 1st century AD and until the Khosrow I, if we assume that the quiver was just taken from the Central Asian root. How would you define that?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. Actually, it's not my observation. It's by Marcus Mode.
Marcus Mode, yeah.
Which, you know, his paper actually, it's not that long. It's a short one, but very specific, I think. He's saying that we don't have this quiver before the mid-6th century. But now you are telling me that we have in Kushan coins.
Of course, yes. We have on the Heraius coinage, but it's not like this shape. It's just elongated, and it's very straight quiver.
Yeah, that's the point. When we started to have this sand clock shape, we are already in the mid 6th century. So that's why mode, you know, the point about this was a chronological discussion, because many scholars were arguing that Taq-i Bustan could be attributed to Peroz the first or Khosrow the second. That was the main discussion. And I think that Mode demonstrated that it could not be Peroz the first. But of course, Peroz has this crown, but Khosrow the second as well.
That's right, yeah.
So the presence of this keeper is telling us that we should consider only the king after the mid 6th century. But the straight keeper, it's not exactly the one that Mode was discussing. And this is possibly something connected with the nomads, you know, maybe the Huns, the Turks. We don't know exactly.
But we have also the same shape of quiver on Taq-i plaque. If we consider that's a Sogdian, the quiver is not straight anymore.
Look, I have the two books by Litvinsky and Pichikian, so I will check later.
Okay.
I would say that Taq-i is Bactrian, very early. So I would be very surprised to find that keyword there. Anyway, I will check. It's a good point. And I will ask again to Mode, because I think he wrote something in German more specific. I took as granted his article in English.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry for that. I prefer English than German. Sorry, too many languages here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you for your observation, of course.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmad, Nadim Ahmad. I saw you raised your hand. If you have a question, please come forward.
Yeah, hi, sorry. I think that was just accidental. Yeah.
Oh, okay, fine.
Anyway, hello, Nadim.
Hi, hello. Oh, actually, I do have something to say about the quivers. Now that you mentioned it, now that I'm unmuted. Sorry, is this the Taq-i plaques with the hunting of the leopards and the deer and things?
I think you should ask Rosie.
Yes, this is what I meant.
Hello.
Yeah, hello. How are you?
Hi, hello, good, thanks. I just got the pictures up. I hope you don't mind me interjecting here, but it looks like those are combined bowcase quivers, like the ones excavated at Nia, as opposed to the hourglass quivers. As far as I'm aware, the earliest hourglass quiver archaeologically is from the 4th century from a site in Mongolia, but it's not common in Central Asia until the Penjikent paintings, as far as I've come across anyway.
Well, thank you. That's another excellent observation. We have something to check upstairs. I will later.
Sorry, Nadim, which artifacts from Mongolia did you point it on? You mean that tapestry?
No, it's not. No. They found a leather quiver. I gotta find the site. Hold on a second. I forgot the name of the site itself, but I can look it up.
But we have also Anoinula. Thank you for mentioning. Anoinula tapestry. We have the same, not the same quiver, but again a straight quiver.
Yeah, it's straight. So I think those ones are the combined bowcase quivers, like you have in Nia and in the Orlat plaques.
Exactly.
So you have a big tube for the bow, and then you have lots of smaller tubes for the arrows. But they kind of fell out. I think the latest appearance of that is the 6th century from either Kızıl or Penjikent, but they're not really used after that. And I think the hourglass quiver appears later.
Right.
This article about the Mongolian stuff, I'll send it to you. But I have the pictures, but not the PDF, not the PDF on hand at the moment.
Please, Nadim, send it to me too. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Dr. Compareti, I have a question of myself. It is something that I've always thought about. When we study history of Iran, we see that it's always had been said that the art of Iran was transferred to Central Asia and then, of course, to Europe. But they never say how and by what means. Can we say that the art of Iran before Islam, the pre-Islamic period, transferred and traveled to Europe through the Silk Road? Can we say that?
I think we can, absolutely. But the model which is going to be developed more now is that many elements from Central Asia pass through Iran and then arrive in the Caucasus, in Western Asia, and then to Europe.
Thank you.
The point is that, when we started to have Muslim authors, even Persian, but writing in Arabic, of course, before and later in Persian, they are celebrating Sasanian Iran like the golden age of Persian. And the first scholars who studied Sasanian Iran, and specifically Taq-i Bustan, Herzfeld before everybody, always thought that everything should have been invented by the Sasanians. And studying Sasanian art, I prefer to say that, the Sasanians, like anybody else, took many elements. Something gave, but they also received. I mean, they were human beings, so nothing strange. But this is something very interesting. When you have in Chinese written sources, okay, very luxury goods, such as textiles, they were called Persian garments, the Persian clothes that were imported in that year and presented to the emperor were presented by people with Sogdian names. So I think that here we have some, how to say, pre-modern era fake news, if you allow me to use this expression. The Sogdians, who were very experts, very tricky, we know from Chinese sources, very tricky traders, they presented to the Chinese their own goods like something coming from Persia, because the Chinese thought in their mind that if it was coming from far away, from this mysterious Persia, was something very expensive. The Sogdians wanted the money of the Chinese, of course.
Thank you.
So if we reconstruct in these terms, we understand many things.
Michaelian Lilith, I saw you raise your hand. Of course, if you have a question, please.
And thank you very much, Mr. Compareti. Hi from Armenia, of course. I would like to ask you about the inside decoration of the arc of big grotto of Taq-i Bustan, about these two flying Nike or victory under the arc. And in general, we know that Khosrow I has had very good connections with Byzantium. And I know very well your article about the Taq-i Bustan's capitals. In general, all the scholars in general speak about Byzantine Sasanian connections and influences from the Byzantine art just in the period of Khosrow II. And what do you think about these relations, these influences in this issue of this, in your issue about this, about this inside decoration came from the Bustan, or its part is from Khosrow II?
Well,
if
I think
connected with these Byzantine influences, that
yes.
I think it is clear just about these two Nikes hovering under the arch. In general, these influences between Byzantium and Sasanian Iran in this period. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That actually, I think we have, well, Byzantine because of a period, but I would say Greco-Roman elements.
Yes, yes, Greco-Roman.
I would not speak about influence, but I would speak about adoption, because that's a very clear Greek element, the winged victory, the Nike, taken by the Persians, probably through Byzantine art, not necessarily from Roman triumphal arches, because in early Christian art, so even in early Byzantine art, we have very often in ivory triptychs or book covers. We have, for example, in Matenadaran, this very famous Etchmiazin, how to say, evangeliary cover in ivory. And very often we have represented important people under this arch with winged victories very often. And I think that in Taq-i Bustan we have something like that. Some scholars said that even the representation of Khosrow II with Anahita and Ahura Mazda, it's something that we do have in Byzantine churches. Even in Italy, we have this representation on the apse. When you enter the church, if the church is pretty ancient, 6th, 7th century, you have Jesus, Virgin Mary, and Saint John. However, I try to show that in Mesopotamian art, we have already something like that. How to connect this with Christian art, I don't know. But Sasanian art and Mesopotamian art, or if you want, Persian art and Mesopotamian art are very much connected. Then that, of course, we have connection between Sasanian Iran and Byzantine Empire. This is very clear, very, very clear. And I think in the case of these Nikes, we have adoption of something, but also adaptation, because they have a kind of diadem here, and there is a circular element with two wings on the diadem of these winged victories in Taq-i Bustan. And this is absolutely not Byzantine. It's something that the Sasanians added to make it more Persian, if you want. And the two angels, the two Nikes, they have a necklace with 3 pendants, which is again something not Byzantine, is something Persian. So there was an exchange of elements, and in my opinion, the Sasanians had no problems in adopting elements from everywhere else. In Mujmal al-Tawarikh, it's written that the architect, actually the architects who did Taq-i Bustan, were Chinese and Roman. Roman means Byzantine, of course, Romayoi. And Chinese means somebody from Central Asia, probably. You know, in Persian literature, even Mani was a Chinese painter, so that means Central Asian. I think that we could consider in these terms. But this is just to say that the Sasanians were very open, like everybody else in that period, like China, like the Roman Empire, India. Everybody was pretty much ready to accept and not only to give his own elements. And Taq-i Bustan is a good, how to say, center to attract all these elements.
Yes.
May I ask a question?
for the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I ask a question about what you called pseudo senmurg on the armor of the king?
Mhm.
So if I noticed well, it's represented 4 times or even 6 times in the garment. So if it's far, why it's represented 4 times? It should be just 1 far.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Well, you know, when we have these textiles, which in my opinion are coming from Central Asia, almost always we have this repetition.
Mm.
We have roundels or we have just the animals without any frame, but they are always represented. Even in Afrasiab, in Samarkand paintings, we have this shape of a frame and we have several animals, not only one. Actually, it's one inside the frame. This is true. This could be a good point, but they are repeated several times. This was the normal way of representing. I don't think it's connected specifically.
Yes, but
the idea of.
But you know that reading Avesta,
Yeah.
Huarno is something special, which descends on kings, and not all the kings. Some
Yes.
kings like Yama have lost it.
Yes.
So it's.
But if you read in Shahnameh, how many Cayenian heroes had Hwarena, Far? Many.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
I would
many,
not
but not
in terms.
But not many Huarno for
Well,
one
that's,
king. That's very strange.
Yes, that could be. But you know, in ancient times they were repeating the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this was connected with the loom they were using, which allowed this repetition actually.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a I would say that's a philosophical problem.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Naipu, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Professor, for your talk. And I'm asking this as a complete ignorant in this topic and field. So you mentioned Khosrow is bigger than Anahita and Ahura Mazda. My question is this some kind of a, for lack of a better word on my part, blasphemy, unorthodoxy, heterodoxy, kufr, I mean, whatever you may call it? Can we deduct such a claim?
Well, it's difficult to say. Actually, Khosrow is not bigger; it's a little bit taller. Okay, the size is more or less the same. And actually, Khosrow results to be taller because of a pedestal. He is standing on a podium, which is a little bit taller. It's strange, but I don't think it's something blasphemous, because even in Naqsh Rustam 8, we have Narcissus in front of possibly Anahita. And if you check, actually, the Corimbos on the top of the crown of a king is a little bit taller than the crown of Anahita. But actually, his head is not taller. So is this a blasphemy or not? I would say that we cannot really say, but they were doing normally since the time of Narcissus, which is end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th century. So they probably kept doing this all during the Sasanian period. Anyway, that's interesting. I never thought in those terms. You are giving me good hints.
Mr. Moradi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matteo, for your very interesting and enlightening presentation. I would like to ask you two questions. The first question is about Nike. And I was wondering if they really present Nike or they could be identified as Iranian divinities, for example, Bravashis, who are shown in the guise of the Greco-Roman Nike. Then I can ask the second question.
Well, it's difficult to answer. In Kushan coins, the iconography of the Nike, the victory, sometimes is taken to represent Ardoksho, even though there is a problem between the Nike and the Taq-i. I think in English they say Taq-i.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a kind of combination of these two deities, which already in Greek religion, in Greek art, are not exactly very big, important deities. They are like minor deities, like Maenads or spirits, let's say, but very important as symbols. You know, it's not easy to identify every single element from Greek art or Mesopotamian art, in this case, in Iranian arts. I'm trying to do this in a very experimental way in Sogdian art. But in Sasanian art, in Parthian art, and even in the Caucasus, in pre-Christian Caucasus, it's extremely, extremely difficult to propose even very precise parallels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they are obviously Western in inspiration, but I was wondering if we can take them as Iranian deities like Varahram, which was an equivalent with Heraclitus. So here, Nike, in the guise of Faravashis, which are mentioned in Farvardin Yasht.
It could be. It could be because, you know, Nike...
They were responsible to protect the righteous man.
Yes. You know, actually, the point is that the Fravashi in Avesta, if I'm not wrong, is described as a woman.
Yeah, exactly. They are,
So that could match pretty well.
Yeah.
But if I'm not wrong, the Fravashi should be full armor and with weapons. So we don't have exactly that. You see, we don't have...
I think they are shown in Soviet painting without having any armors, right?
Actually, Marshak proposed to identify in one painting the Fravashis holding with some armors, not a full, but some parts were covered with armors. They have a mace and the standard in another hand. But according to Shankar, those are not Fravashi. So you see, the problem is that we don't have image and a label or inscription like in Greek mosaics. And so I think for us it's very difficult.
Yeah, sorry for the interruption. I think in the Soviet case, there is an inscription above the figure stating Bar, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it's in another one. We have Veshparkar on the leg of one painting. And then there is another fragmentary inscription on a very fragmentary painting, and we cannot see the figure. But the Veshparkar is there, and it's him. But that's the only one. Clear.
Thank you. And my second question is that you attribute the larger Avon and the lateral hunting panels to the time of Bustan. I was wondering if there is any archaeological or textual evidence to suggest that that Western Iran, in particular Kermanshah, was ruled by Bustan?
No. We know from coins that Bustan minted his coins from Ray, from that region, and he probably had a kingdom there. When Khosrow defeated him, he defeated him in Hamadan. So between Hamadan and Ray, I mean, Taq-i Bustan is a little bit west. What I was proposing in one of my articles is that when Bustan rebelled against Khosrow, so they were in good terms, then they quarreled, and Bustan lost Taq-i Bustan. And in that very moment, Khosrow started to destroy some parts and rebuild. But at a certain point, something happened, which I think is Heraclius' invasion from Armenia, okay, from the Caucasus. And in fact, some parts of Taq-i Bustan were never finished, especially the deer hunt. There are some parts which you see people just they are very crudely carved, but their textiles do not present decorations. And some parts of the enclosing net was never finished. So I think that if we put every historical fact in Taq-i Bustan, more or less we can propose a good pattern. But of course, we need, for example, we need excavation in Taq-i Bustan. Inshallah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Mr. Adel, you have raised your hand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Compareti. I have a short question. What is a strategic importance of Kermanshah for Iranian Shah in Silk Road?
Well, you know, in Persian, in Farsi, you call Silk Road the Khorasan Road, which from, how to say, a space point of view, it's not really interesting Fars. You know, from Khorasan, from the real Silk Road, is just passing through North Iran. So ideally, in my mind, the Silk Road is passing through Iran, but mainly in the northern part. So if we consider the Khorasan Road entering from northeastern Iran and then going close to the Caspian coast, and it's passing through Kermanshah, it's not going to Fars, which was the center, the cradle of Sasanian civilization, okay? Where all the other rock reliefs are concentrated. So from a point of view of the Silk Road, Taq-i Bustan is more important than any other Sasanian rock relief. And I think it's not by chance that we have so many textile decoration, precious textiles, I would say. I hope I answer your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Compareti. If there's no other questions, I think we can wrap it up. Dr. Compareti, I sincerely thank you for accepting our invitation to this seminar and conference. It was such an honor and a pleasure with you. And thank you to all our dear participants. Without you, this event wouldn't have been possible. Again, I have to thank Dr. Naipur and of course the University of Freiburg for giving us this opportunity and this platform. And Mr. Farshad Adel and Mr. Ali Hassani, who has organized this event, we're very thankful to them. Dear audience, I hope you have a very good day. Goodbye to you all.
Khoda Hafiz.
Khoda Hafiz.
Heli mamnoon.